So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case. Today we're going to be talking about the case of Jessie Blodgett. And for once in my life, I don't think I've got anything else to say in the beginning of these videos, so let's just get into it. Before we do, I just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This video is for educational purposes, and everything that I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. So Jessie Blodgett was born in the spring of 1994 in Atlanta, Georgia, to parents Buck and Joy Blodgett, although they eventually moved to Wisconsin. Jessie, from a very early age, was so gifted in so many different ways. She was such a talented girl. In the first grade, when Jessie and all of her classmates were given like lists of words to learn and learn how to spell, Jessie could do them like that. And so her teachers had to make Jessie her own lists of more complex words while all the rest of her classmates were learning the easier ones. She began learning to play piano at a very early age, and she was obsessed with performing, singing, dancing, acting. She loved it. Jessie got older, she began to see all of the injustice in the world. As we all do when we get to a certain age, you realise that the world just isn't fair. And where most people would just kind of accept the world for what it is in all its unfairness, Jessie couldn't stand it. She couldn't live in a world like that, and so she wanted to change it. She couldn't bear to see anyone suffer or anything suffer. She was a big campaigner for animal rights and social justice. Her family describe her as a fierce defender of animal rights, environmentalism, sustainability, social justice, and women victimised by male violence. But for Jessie, her main, burning passion in life was music. Of course, she loved performing, acting, and dancing, but music and singing and playing piano and writing her own music was everything to Jessie. Her friend Jacqueline has been quoted saying that every time I would go over to her house, she'd be playing the piano. Even when I was trying to talk to her, she'd be playing the piano. She loved to create, so of course she loved covering other people's music, but she loved to write her own and perform her own and create something, and she surrounded herself with people like that as well. All of her friends were into performing, music, acting, dancing as well. And one of her closest friends was the boy that she sat next to all the way through high school, 19-year-old Daniel Bartelt. And he, just like Jessie, was incredibly gifted, both academically and musically. He played violin, he starred in shows just like Jessie did, and he was known for being the funny one. Jessie and Dan both met in their first year of high school, and obviously they had everything in common. They were like the same soul in two different bodies. They were obsessed with all the same things, and to them it seemed logical to maybe be in a romantic relationship, be boyfriend and girlfriend, because they were so good for each other. However, after 4 months, Dan decided that he just kind of liked them as friends, that this wasn't a romantic thing that he wanted to pursue with Jessie. And so the two of them split up for no kind of major reason. They continued to be friends, and they were best friends for the rest of high school and into college. So yeah, the two of them left high school and went off to college, and Dan actually went to one out of the state, whereas Jessie stayed in Wisconsin. And they didn't necessarily lose touch, but they just definitely weren't as close when Dan moved away. Jessie originally started college studying something a lot more academic because her father Buck said that maybe it was more practical to get something more academic under her belt and kind of pursue music on the side. But Jessie just knew that she was meant to do music. That was her true passion. That was what she was meant to do with her life. And so she actually managed to persuade her parents to let her switch her major to music. Around this same time, Jessie quit a part-time job that she had as a waitress and decided to start up her own little mini business, giving people music lessons, singing, violin, piano lessons. And within 2 months of setting up this little side business giving lessons, Jessie already had 26 students, so she was very, very busy, and from this, she was being offered other jobs left, right and centre to do with music. The local church wanted her to be choir director. She was also offered a job mentoring disadvantaged kids in music, and everything was going so well for Jessie. She had so many opportunities. The vision that Jessie had for her life, like her ultimate vision, was to be a high school or university choir director. She wanted to teach at least 100 kids a year and use music to impact people and change the world. Jessie's first year of college, like I said, went so well for her, and then that summer, in the summer of 2013, everyone was coming back to Wisconsin from colleges out of the state, so Jessie was reunited with all her old friends. And one of these friends that was obviously back in the state was Dan Bartelt, her friend from high school, and he actually told Jessie that he'd quit college. It wasn't for him, it wasn't working out. So now he was back in Wisconsin permanently, and Dan and Jessie's friendship from that moment completely blossomed again into what it once was when they were back in high school. They were together nearly every day that summer. They were playing music together, writing music together, singing together, recording things together. And that summer, both Dan and Jessie landed lead roles in 2 separate plays, Dan in Bye Bye Birdie and Jessie as the fiddler in Fiddler on the Roof. So the first show of Jessie's in Fiddler on the Roof was July 14th, 2013, and of course she performed amazingly as she always did. And then that night was the first cast party. Here's some footage of Jessie at this party. She seems happy, but as we later find out, she was actually really uncomfortable in that video. She returned home from the party in the early hours of the morning and spoke with her mother and said that there were 2 older men at that party that were being inappropriate with her. They were flirting with her. They were making her feel uncomfortable. And so they talked about it for a little bit, and then they both eventually ended up going to bed. And before Jessie went to sleep, she actually wrote about this party in her diary. She wrote, "I think I'm being corrupted. I think certain men are taking what should be platonic love and perverting it into a competition." At 8 a.m. the following morning, Joy Blodgett, Jessie's mother, woke up. She did the laundry. She left some laundry in Jessie's room, and then she went off to work. But her father was already at work at this point. And then 4 hours later, around noon, Joy returns home for her lunch break. But the house seems strangely quiet. There's no piano, there's no singing as there normally is. So she just assumed Jessie, she's on summer break, she's probably sleeping in like most teenagers would when they've got time off of college. And so she began shouting up to her to wake her up because it was midday. But there was no movement from her room, so Joy went and stood in the doorway and again shouted to Jessie, "Get out of bed, wake up." But again, there was no movement from Jessie in her bed, and Joy couldn't understand why she wasn't waking up, why she was kind of ignoring her. And so Joy went over to go and nudge her, and when she touched Jessie, she was cold.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Hartford 901, what's your emergency?
My daughter is blue. I went to wake her up, and I just got home from lunch, and she won't wake up.
She's 19.
My God.
Okay, hang on just a second.
Okay.
Okay, so is she breathing?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, ma'am, do you know how to do CPR?
Jessie.
Do you know how to do CPR, ma'am?
She's cold. She's cold.
She's cold?
She's cold. Oh my God. Oh my God. She's good.
Okay.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Her pants are all wet and she's got, it looks like strangulation marks.
There are strangulation marks?
That's what it looks like. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on. Honey, what happened to you? No. No. Honey, no. No.
Police and an ambulance were sent to the scene, however, it was already too late and Jessie Blodgett had already passed away aged 19. So Jessie's father, Buck, raced home from work, although he and Joy, Jessie's own mum and dad, weren't allowed in the room to go and see her, to go and touch her, to go and say goodbye, because she was a crime scene at this point. This was obviously quite suspicious. So crime scene investigators went into Jessie's room while her body was still there. Obviously they don't move anything straight away. And they noticed what seemed to be ligature marks and tie marks on her neck and on her wrists, meaning that maybe she'd been bound. And that also suggests that her cause of death was probably strangulation with a ligature. And they also noticed that obviously Jessie's hair and her clothing was wet, and this suggests that her killer probably tried to get rid of any evidence on her. So there were the obvious immediate questions of who did this to Jessie, why did they do it, how did they get in the house? And the crime scene investigators quickly noticed that there was no signs of forced entry on the house, no smashed windows, no broken locks. So it seemed as if maybe this was someone that Jessie knew herself and had let in. Or maybe it was someone that knew access points to the house, so someone that had been to the house before, so still someone that knew Jessie. Of course, when Joy, Jessie's mother, started to think about it, she became really concerned about that conversation that they'd had just 12 hours earlier. Jessie was talking about 2 older men that were being sexually inappropriate towards her, and then this happened. And so her mother told police. So police began asking around the cast of Jessie's production, Fiddler on the Roof, to see if there was any inappropriate behaviour going on at that party, if anyone else noticed it. These kids had noticed some men being inappropriate with Jessie. One of them at one point even pulled her onto his lap. And so police decided to look into this more. So they looked into one man in particular, the one that pulled her onto his lap, because obviously that is very concerning behaviour. And so they got in touch with this man's manager at his work, and his manager said that he actually hadn't turned up for work that day, the morning after the cast party, the morning after Jessie died, which is obviously even more concerning to police, and so they brought him in for questioning. Detectives spoke with this man for only a couple of hours before ruling him out completely as a suspect. So obviously he's innocent, so I don't know his name, I don't know what went on in that questioning, but you know, police cleared him of any involvement, so it must have been convincing. Both he and the other older man at that party that was being inappropriate, both of them were ruled out, and so a search for Jessie's killer continued. But as police in Jessie's town were questioning and ruling out suspects, they didn't know that police in the next town over were focusing in on Jessie's killer, only for a different crime that they'd committed. And this other crime that Jessie's killer had committed was another attack on another woman, completely different woman in a different town on a different day, but eerily similar to Jessie. Just 3 days before Jessie's murder, a woman named Melissa Etzler was out walking her dog in a local park when she was attacked. Melissa was just getting ready to leave the park. She was heading towards the exit when she heard footsteps behind her.
So I looked back and I laughed and said, "Oh, you scared me," just because I thought he was some friendly guy. And then I turn around again because I can hear him coming at me, and I see a knife in his hand.
And Melissa says that the next thing she remembers was this man tackling her to the ground, and she's laying face down while he's sat on her, pinning her down. So of course she began wrestling him off her, and she eventually grabbed hold of the knife, but she grabbed hold of it by the blade, and this cut up her hand really badly. Eventually she managed to completely wrestle this knife off him, so now he is completely disarmed and she has a weapon, and so he's trying to get it back off her, but she's saying no, she's got a really good grip on it and it's not going anywhere. And at this point the attacker realised that he wasn't going to get this knife back. Melissa was very athletic, she was very strong, she wasn't going to let this knife go. And so he turned to her and he said, "Can I just go?" And Melissa said, "Yeah, go." And so he ran away. So Melissa went straight to the hospital for her wounds to be treated because, like I said, she was bleeding really badly from her hand and she had a bunch of other injuries. And while she was there, police came to interview her about this attacker, and her memory was amazing. She described the attacker so vividly. She said that he was a white male, 18 to 20 years of age, 6'2", around 210 pounds, light blonde hair, very fair skin, and he was wearing plaid shorts. She remembered exactly which parking space this man had parked in, because obviously he ran back to his car to speed away, and she remembered the exact model of his car, almost down to the year. It was a dark blue minivan. She said exactly it was a Dodge Caravan, I don't know what year, an older model though. So from this really vivid description, police were able to make a composite sketch of this attacker, and they believed that as soon as it went out on the news, they were going to get hundreds of calls in telling them who this person was because it seemed so accurate. But it went out on the news and police got no feedback. But they did get one lead, and it wasn't from the public actually, it was from an internal source within the police force. It was another officer that actually recognised the model of car. And this officer remembered seeing this exact van, the exact colour, the exact model, in that exact same parking space a while before this attack. So not on the same day, but a lot of people tend to have a parking space or an area of a parking lot that they tend to go to. So he felt that that was a strong lead. But not only that, not only did he recognise the car, he actually ran the plates on the car that day, so he had the details of this car in the system somewhere. However, the owner of this vehicle was nothing like Melissa's description. She said a 6-foot blonde man, fair skin, fair hair, but the owner of this minivan was a middle-aged couple. So the police went to go and interview this couple anyway, just in case, you know, they obviously owned a van that was very similar, maybe it had been stolen or something like that. And so they went to speak to them, and they found out that at that time, on the morning of Melissa's attack, their son was actually out borrowing the van to go to work. And their son was 6 foot, fair-haired, fair-skinned, 210 pounds, you know, the exact description of Melissa's attacker. And so his parents gave police his phone number. Meanwhile, as all of this was going on in a separate town, the search for Jessie's killer was still going on, and her family and friends were obviously still grieving. This was very soon after her murder. And so they decided to hold a vigil at their house where all of her friends, all of her performing friends, high school, college friends, all her students, all her family could come and tell stories and hug and share memories and support each other. And then as they were all talking together, Dan Bartelt's phone rings and he answers it and he just says, "Yeah, sure, I'll be right there." But on the other end of that phone call was a police detective. Dan Bartelt was the teenage son of that middle-aged couple that owned the minivan.
But what sparked more interest, when I got off the phone, I looked at Detective Walsh and said he never even asked me what this was about. How many people get called by a detective, asked to meet, and they don't say, "What's going on? Why do I need to meet you?"
So when Dan got off the phone, he looked up at everyone in the room and said, "It was the police. I've just been called down to the police station." And obviously at this point, no one in the room knew about the attack on Melissa. Obviously that was what the questioning was about. That's why he was being called to the police station. But everyone in the room just assumed that it'd be in connection with Jessie. So Jessie's mother, Joy, comforted Dan. She went up to him and she said, "Oh, don't worry about it. They'll probably be calling in all of Jessie's friends just to kind of question them, see what was going on that night or in her life or whatever. Don't worry about it." So Dan went down to the police station, and just before his interrogation, as police were like setting everything up, getting everything ready, one of the officers was having small talk with him. And at this point the cameras were already rolling, the microphones were going, they were just kind of preparing paperwork and things like that. And this officer said to him, "So where have you been tonight?" And so Dan said that he was at Jessie Blodgett's vigil. And because this detective was from a different town, he knew of Jessie's name and the case and everything, but he didn't really know the details. And so he said to Dan, he was like, "Oh, what happened to her? Is that the girl that passed away? Like, what's going on with that?" And Dan Bartelt said to this police officer, "I think someone raped and murdered her." And then obviously the paperwork was sorted and everything, and they got onto the questioning about Melissa. So one of the first questions was, where was he on the Friday that Melissa was attacked? Was he at that park? And he said, "No, I don't believe so." He was just denying everything, all knowledge of Melissa and her attack and everything. And as Dan was talking, telling his story and whatever, one of the detectives was like watching him talk, and he was talking a lot with his arms. And this detective noticed a graze on his elbow, and so he pulled him up on it, and Dan said, "Oh, probably just fell or something." So then he asked to properly see his arms and his hands, so Dan put his hands out, and this detective noticed a puncture wound on his thumb, which again, he asked him how he got it. And Dan said that he had been jabbed with a screw at work, and so they asked him some more questions about work, and found that he didn't actually have a job. He was just pretending to his parents that he actually had a job. Every morning he would wake up early, he would put his uniform on, he would make his lunch, he would get ready, and then he would go to work. But all he'd really do was borrow the family minivan and just go out for the day and go to random places and parks and just go and sit about all day. And so police said, right, you don't have a job, then how did you get that injury? You've just told us that you don't have a job, so how could you have done it at work? And then Dan changed his story to he was at home, he was cooking a meal, he was cutting up some vegetables and whatever, and he accidentally cut his thumb. And so at that point, police stopped him and they said, look, we know you're lying. Why would he need to cover that up? If that was the truth, that he cut his finger cooking at home, why would he have tried to cover it up saying that he did it at work? He wouldn't have needed that. Obviously, he'd given an excuse for this injury on his thumb. They'd poked holes in his excuse saying that he didn't have a job, so he thought of another excuse. They were both lies, and police knew this. Obviously, Dan was trying really hard to cover up the true story behind the injury on his thumb, and so they said, look, we know you're lying, just tell the truth. And so Dan said, yeah, I did attack that girl in the park, Melissa. And so detectives asked why. Like, what was his intention? What was his motive? What was he gonna do once he had power over her? And Dan said that he just wanted to scare her. He said that ever since he dropped out of college, he felt scared. Scared of life. He felt like he didn't have a future. He was scared of the future. And so he just wanted to make someone else feel that kind of fear. So now they had a confession and a motive, but just to back it up, police wanted some evidence. So police went to the park and they gathered all of the rubbish from all of the bins from the day that Melissa was attacked. And they went through it, and in one of these bins they found multiple items that had Dan Bartelt's blood on them. One of these items that Dan had thrown away was a roll of tape, which he was probably going to use to put over her mouth, or maybe around her wrists and her ankles or something. And then on a search of Dan's home, they found that same identical tape around some of his pipes, proving that that was Dan's tape. And just for that extra bit of evidence, police decided to put Dan Bartelt in a lineup of different suspects, people that kind of look a bit like him, and Melissa looked at this lineup and immediately picked out Dan as her attacker. So Dan was arrested and held in custody awaiting trial, and in the meantime, one of the officers that interviewed him that day remembered something strange about that interview. So if you remember, the officer was just kind of making small talk with Dan before the interview began. They were talking about Jessie and her vigil and like what happened to her and everything. And when he asked Dan what had happened to Jessie, Dan said that she'd been raped and murdered. And this came as a surprise to police because Jessie's autopsy hadn't even finished yet. And so even police didn't know that she'd been raped. It's not like it was public information, it's not like it was in the news. Literally, Jessie's own parents didn't even know at this point. Police didn't know, no one knew. The only person that could have known that was the murderer. And so this was grounds enough for police to get a search warrant of Dan's electricals. Obviously they'd already looked at his house and everything, but they wanted to seize like his laptop, his phone, things like that. And on Dan's computer, detectives found extensive search history of like bondage porn, along with a search history of terms like spree killers and serial killers. But the most concerning thing that police found on Dan's computer was a snuff film, which, if you don't know what a snuff film is, it is a video of someone being killed. And that in itself is very, very concerning, but it only gets worse when you find out that the exact events that happened in that snuff film is the exact events that happened to Jessie that night. In this movie, a woman is sexually assaulted and then she's strangled with a ligature and then her body is washed to get rid of all the evidence. And if you remember, Jessie's clothes and her hair were wet, she'd been washed. So now police decided to get Dan in and question him specifically about Jessie's murder, whereas before he'd only been talking about Melissa, now they wanted to know about Jessie. So as soon as he came in, the first question they asked him was, what do you think happened to Jessie? Just to see if he'd slip up and say the same thing again. But this time, instead of incriminating himself, Dan just broke down in tears and said, I don't know. And detectives knew already that Dan was very, very close to Jessie that summer, and he had been for years before that, but particularly that summer when he came back from college, they spent a lot of time together. And Jessie's parents had told the police that, and when they did, police were quite concerned because Dan had never mentioned that to them. Dan hadn't said how close he was to Jessie. He kind of acted in his questioning as if he didn't really know her. And so police thought that was really suspicious, and so they pulled him up on it. They said, why haven't you told us that? Because you can obviously see how bad it looks. And Dan told police that he did this because he and Jessie were starting a kind of romantic relationship that summer. They were flirting, things were going a bit further than they should have. And Dan actually had a girlfriend at the time, which is why this was so bad. And so he didn't want to tell anyone that he was close to Jessie and that he'd been spending so much time with Jessie, just in case it got out and got to his girlfriend. And all the way through this interview, as police are asking him about like Jessie, their friendship, what happened to her that night, Dan is crying, he's whimpering, he is sniffling. But this whole time, detectives didn't see a single real tear come out of his eyes. Like, his eyes were completely dry. As for his alibi on the day of Jessie's murder, Dan said that he was doing what he always did, pretending he was at work. He went out in the van, he went driving, went to a couple of parks. He said around 10 a.m. that morning he arrived at a park named Woodlawn Park, and he sat there for a while reading and trying to write a book. And so, out of interest, police began asking Dan like more about this book that he was writing. They didn't know that he was writing a book. And so Dan told them that it was actually a series of books, and the main character was called Jessica, and she would eventually be murdered. And as suspicious as that might sound, Dan was still denying every single accusation that police were throwing at him, and so the interrogation continued. And as he was being questioned, Dan's demeanour gradually shifted from sad, grieving, crying friend to defensive and argumentative. He told police that they were making him feel uncomfortable, they were making him feel like a suspect, and like they were insinuating things about the situation. And with that, Dan Bartelt said, if you want to ask any more questions, I would like to have a lawyer present. And so the questioning finished. But police did have the first half of the questioning to go off. They still had some little bits to be looking into. For example, his alibi that he was at the Woodlawn Park that morning. And sure enough, when police checked the CCTV at the park, Dan was there at 10 a.m, so he couldn't have been at Jessie's house at that time. But of course, that doesn't account for during the night. He could have killed her and then gone home, sorted himself out, got ready for work, and then gone out to this park afterwards. And so police thought, right, if he'd already killed Jessie that morning, he will have had evidence that he will have wanted to get rid of. So they went to this park, Woodlawn Park, where they had evidence that he was that morning from the CCTV. And they began looking for evidence in bushes, in ditches. They checked the rubbish in the bins again. And in one of these bins, police found an empty cereal box with paper towels shoved inside it. So they took this cereal box out, took all the paper towels out, and they realised that it wasn't all paper towels. Wrapped up inside was some rope, alcohol wipes, and a ball gag. The rope seemed to line up perfectly with the marks on Jessie's neck as well. And on a second search of Dan's home, they found the long piece of rope that this shorter piece of rope was cut from. But not only that, on a second search of Jessie's home, on a second search of the actual crime scene, police found a roll of tape under her bed. And this tape was the same brand, the same type of tape that police had found in the bins with his blood on when he tried to attack Melissa. That same tape that was found on pipes in Dan's home was now found under Jessie's bed with his fingerprints on it. Obviously, police took Dan Bartelt's DNA so that they could test all of these items in that cereal box from the park, and they found Dan's DNA on every single one of those things, along with Jessie's DNA. But not only that, now that they had Dan Bartelt's DNA, they went back and checked Jessie's body, and of course they found Dan's DNA under her fingernails. And because of what Dan said in his interview about the sexual assault, they went and tested her, and yes, she'd been sexually assaulted by Dan Bartelt. And even though Dan was denying every single accusation against him, he was still charged with first-degree murder and found guilty. Dan was sentenced to life in prison because the judge believed that if he wasn't locked up for life, he would go on to do this again. Obviously, he was determined to kill someone or hurt someone or sexually assault someone because he'd tried twice in the space of 3 days. What's stopping him from doing that ever again, you know? Dan actually tried to appeal his sentence in 2017, so just almost 2 years ago, on the grounds that police had not explained his rights to him well enough. And of course, this was rejected and he's still serving life in prison. So quickly, before I end this video, I just want to introduce you to a new little segment that I'm going to be doing in the end of every single one of my true crime videos from now on. Obviously, these videos always end on a really, really sad note, and that can't be helped. These are sad videos in nature. but I don't really want you guys to be leaving my videos sad. I want something good to come from these videos, more than just education on these cases. I want actual change, actual help from these videos. And so I've decided that in the end of every single one of my true crime videos, we are going to talk about a different charity. Big, small, whatever the cause is, just we're going to talk about a different charity. We're going to talk about the good that they do for the world. I just think it would be such a good thing for all of us, for me and you guys that watch these videos, that are constantly watching all this sad stuff. Like, I want to end it on a lighter note. It'll be good for the charities that we're helping out. They'll get more donations, they'll get more exposure, hopefully. That's where you guys come in. So if you guys have any particular charities that mean a lot to you personally, small, big, whatever the cause, literally anything, let me know. Put them in the comments, tweet me them, Instagram me them, whatever. As for today's charity that we're going to talk about, I thought that this was the most perfect time to start this little segment in my videos, because Buck Blodgett, Jessie's father, actually started his own charity in memory of Jessie. It's called the Love is Greater Than Hate Project, and their main mission, their main goal is to end male violence against women.
I felt like I was given a job to do, and I feel like all of us have a job to do. And we all are meant to learn and grow and develop ourselves as better and better human beings, and learn how to bring more and more love into this world and end evil and violence and hate. I said at Jessie's funeral, love is and always will be stronger than hate. I don't know why I said that. I don't know where that came from. I just did. And I had no idea the ripple effect out through the community of the impact of those words. But I began to see it in the weeks to come, especially at the Candlelight Walk, when there was banners and everything everywhere that said love is greater than hate. And when I saw all that, I realized something was going on here that was bigger than me. And I was supposed to do something about it, and all of us are supposed to do something about it.
They give presentations, they talk in high schools, talking to young people who are still growing and still forming their values and their morals in their head. It's really important to educate, of course, everyone on things like this, on violence against women, but especially younger people who need this kind of education as they're growing up, as they're forming their personality, as they're forming who they are. They are, of course, a non-profit organisation that rely on donations to be able to give these talks in high schools, on radio shows, on TV shows. Of course, you can donate as little or as much as you personally can afford and as much as you feel comfortable with. Imagine if every single one of us watching this video right now could donate at least just £1. Imagine how much we could raise for Jessie and for her memory and for her family and for her story to go on and change lives. Of course, you can just donate and that's it, but you can also buy merchandise from the website. They have bands, they have badges, they have key rings, t-shirts, jewellery, a book written by Jessie's father. Of course, the link to the Love is Greater Than Hate project will be down below in the description. Please consider checking it out, consider donating, consider buying a piece of merchandise to represent this amazing cause. And of course, if you have any other charities that you want me to feature in the end of one of my videos, let me know in the comments. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, make sure you leave a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you want to see some more from me, because I upload these true crime videos all the freaking time. If you want to see some more of like me, like Eleanor, like the weird person behind this very serious true crime queenie, then consider subscribing to my second channel. I'll link it up here in the little eye thing. But yeah, I'd really appreciate you checking that out, because I do love that channel, and even though I don't upload on it as much as I should, it's still my little baby and I love it so much. A big shout out to all of my channel members. All of their names are on screen right now. If you want to become a channel member, all you have to do is click the link in my description, or you can click the join button if you're on a desktop. If you do become a channel member, you get access to a bunch of extra perks. You get your name on this end screen of every single video. You'll also get access to a members only community tab where we talk about the cases. I'll ask for case suggestions. You'll get your suggestions fast tracked. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. Again, the links to the charity are down below, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!